Now I'm going to move on to the hat and the other hair parts. So I need to unhide them. And I can bone parent the mustache and the hair straight to the head def bone. Now it really doesn't matter if I parent it to the control version or the deformation version, but as a default, I kind of always lean towards using a deformation version. Our hat G is going to be a little bit different because we need an extra control for that one. So I'm going to figure out where a good pivot point is for that. So I'm just going to pivot around the 3D cursor and position it in a few different spots. So that's kind of where I want it to pivot around, in the middle of the head, roughly in line with the top of the eyebrows. So I think that's a good spot for it to kind of pivot around. So I'll jump into edit mode and then I'll duplicate that head bone. And here you'll see me make a mistake. I could have just dragged that bone into the position that I wanted, but instead I snapped it to the cursor, but my cursor was on this surface. You've seen me realize that when I take a look from a different angle. But I'm going to do the parenting. So I'm going to parent the hat control straight to the head control. And then because I duplicated the bone, it duplicated the widget, so I can clear that. And then I'll parent the hat geometry straight to that hat bone that I just created. Here's where I realized my stuff up. I snapped it to the cursor and the cursor was on the surface, not in the middle of the character. Silly me. So I'm just going to reposition the head and the tail of that bone to the center. And that has broken my hat geometry. So I'm going to unparent it and then reparent it. And once I've fixed my stuff up, I can add a hat widget, and I just decided to use a circle, but kind of shape it to the top of the hat there. And this is what our character looks like at the moment. We are going to keep it simple when we add our bone colors. I'll stick mainly to red and yellow with a few exceptions. I think those colors stick out the most. I will use gray on the vis bones so we can see them, but they don't become too obvious. But you are free to use whatever colors you like. But let's take a look at the colors that I've chosen. Now I'll move along to the bone collections. I'm going to keep it simple again. We're going to create a collection called root and make sure that's where we put our root bone. I'm going to put all the leg controls on a collection called legs. The shoulders and the arm controls will go on arms, and everything in the middle is going to go onto a collection called torso. So all the way from the spine all up to the hat. As I said earlier, I'm being a little bit lazy with the collections, but I am trying to keep it simple. And all the deformation bones should already be on that deformation collection. And we're done for the moment. We don't have any mechanism bones yet, but if you decide to add the extra stretchy bits, then later we will. But here are my collections: arms, torso, legs, root, and def. Before I lock all the channels I don't need, I'm going to Euler out all of my bones. So just change them over to Euler XYZ. And I'm going to select all of our deformation bones and lock absolutely everything on them. So I'm holding down Alt when I lock those channels. Then I can hide the whole entire collection. And then I want to figure out which channels I want to lock on the other controls. So on the root, I'm going to leave that open. On the feet, I think I'm only going to lock the scale. I could leave them open because that scale doesn't really technically break anything, but I just don't think it looks that good. So I'll lock it. The pole targets don't need anything except for location. Now you already know how to do the override trick, so you can add your little widget mechanism bone there if you want it to rotate back towards the knee target. But for this, I'm just leaving that out. Our viz bones can have everything locked as well as the selection. So I'm going to enable that filter up in the outliner. Now don't do this step yet if you want the extra stretch on your limbs, because we'll need to turn this off again so that we can edit our bones. But if you're going for the basic non-stretchy version, then you can lock them now. But I'm going to select all the viz bones, disable all the channels and also the selectability over in the outliner. Now I'm moving to the spine to see what that looks like. I'm going to lock the scale on the hips. It kind of breaks things because it's affecting the way the legs are working. So that's why I'm going to lock that. And then I'll do the same on the rest of the spine controls just to make it consistent. I didn't mean to leave one of the scale channels open on the chest, but I just accidentally missed that. Did you spot it? Perhaps you did. And then I'll leave everything open on the shoulder and the hands. And I really like the scale on those hands. It looks kind of funny. And actually, I'll leave everything else open on all of the other controls. So that is all my locking done. I am now going to tidy up all of the weight painting that was done by the auto weights earlier. So we need to turn on our deformation collection because they're the bones we're going to paint. So we're going to select our armature and then the mesh and then jump into weight paint mode so we can select our bones really easily. Then I will pose my character, put him in a weird position and work on the problem areas. I know that the hips are always really tricky, so I'm going to add some weight to the hip bone there. Now I should have auto normalize turned on, but I don't think I do at this stage. which does mean that the visual feedback is going to be incorrect, even though the weighting might be better. I'll shrink the brush down. I don't want them to be too big and have too much of an influence, but I'm going to add some weights to the hip here. Once you've added some weights, you can blur your work to kind of get a smooth transition. And then I can subtract some weights from the thigh on the torso area. I do have my add brush enabled, but I'm holding down Control to do the opposite of add. And you can always go a little bit further than you want and then blur things back. That's something that I do quite a lot. Here is where I'm thinking about whether I should enable preserve volume or not. And I think it is going to look better. So I will enable that on the armature modifier. And to actually be able to see the deformed view in edit mode, we need to enable those options on the modifier as well. So we can see where the verts really are once they're deformed. Here you can see my really poor modeling skills on the knee. Look out, Kent, I'm coming for you. And just to tidy up the foot weights, I'm going to unlock the rotation on that deformation bone to see what it looks like. If I rotate the foot IK, the knee is going to move as well. So I'm just isolating the foot in that particular spot. But usually we have to paint extra weight on the back heel section because the auto weights kind of fills that in with the shin, and we want that to follow along with the foot. On the torso, and in fact the whole model, there isn't that many verts. I've kept it low poly, so I can adjust them exactly how I did on the tube exercise. That's why I was teaching you that. So I can just adjust the weight and then normalize that. That helps you put the vert exactly where you need it to be. It does look like the arm or the shoulder is affecting the beard. So the easiest way to fix that is to add some weights to the head on that beard area. And here is where I noticed that my weights are lying to me because I didn't have that auto normalize checked on when I normally do. And then when I paint again, you'll see it is actually following along 100% now. Then I'm testing the shoulder and I can see it's influenced the neck vertices a little bit too much. So I'm just reducing that. And then underneath our armpit area, I want to reduce the effect that that upper arm has. So I'm doing the final little tweaks on that by adjusting the individual vertices. With the arms and the hand, I think the auto weighting did a pretty good job, so I'm going to leave them alone. So that is our weight painting done at this stage. I will revisit the weights after I add the stretching to the legs, but at this stage, if the legs aren't stretching, this will work fine for us. All right, so now we have a pretty much finished rig, although this is the non-stretchy version of this rig. Our limbs have IK, but they don't stretch, as you can see. And hopefully you can see the difference between the two different setups. On the legs, I used parenting. I parented the deft foot straight to the control. So the foot actually stays attached, but the leg disconnects from that foot. Whereas on the arms, I used the copy transform constraint, and I didn't adjust any of the parenting. And because the deformation bone is a connected child, the constraint actually can't disconnect that. So only the control detaches on our arms. Both ways have their advantages and disadvantages, but for this basic setup, we could say that this is complete as long as we don't want to do any limb stretching. But what if we do want to do some limb stretching? I'll show you that we can't actually do it on our deformation bones. So I'll open up the IK settings and then I'll set the stretch to 0.1. And you'll see that this doesn't work for us because it's scaling the whole entire limb. It's ballooning along with that stretch. So how do we work around this? This is a situation where we would need to use some mechanism bones. So let's do that now. All right, to get the arms to stretch, we're going to select our two arm bones and then duplicate them. I'm going to place them on a new collection called MCH, and then I'm going to rename them. So I'm going to replace DEF with MCH and then remove the 001 off the end. Because I copied those bones, it also copied the constraints as well as the IK stretching that I've already done. So I don't need to add the constraint to these mechanism bones, but I do need to remove that IK constraint from the deformation arm. Then to get the deformation bones to follow along with the mechanism bones, I'm going to use two constraints. I'm going to have it copy the rotation of its mechanism counterpart, and then I'll make it stretch to the next bone. So our forearm will stretch to the hand, and then on that stretch to constraint, I'm going to disable the maintain volume so it doesn't get skinny and fat. That is half of the arm done. It's looking a little bit weird at the moment, but we will get there. I need to do exactly the same on the upper arm. So I'm going to copy the rotation of the mechanism bone, and then the upper arm is going to stretch to the next mechanism bone. I'll also disable the volume on that constraint, and we can have a look. And this is what we want it to work like. It is stretching, but it is not ballooning up on all three axes. So let's do the same thing to our legs. But first, I'm going to add that IK stretch values on our leg bones. Now, technically, I only need to add that stretch to the mechanism bones, not the deformation version. But I'm doing it on these ones because it's going to be copied across. It won't have any bad effects on our deformation bones. I'm doing it now because there's only one bone in here, so it's easier to select. So after I duplicate those bones, I'm going to move them to the mechanism collection and then fix the name. So make them mechanism bones and remove the 001. And I can also remove the IK constraint from the deformation version. Then we want our deformation shin to copy the rotation of its mechanism counterpart and then stretch all the way to the foot control. I'll also disable that maintain volume and do exactly the same thing to our thigh. The deformation will copy the mechanism bone, and then we're going to stretch to the next mechanism bone and disable the volume. And this is how our legs are working. Now, because we are using the stretch to constraint on our thighs, you'll notice that we do need to adjust those thigh weights on the torso because it's kind of having too much influence. So I will adjust those weights and just increase the influence that the hips have on that area and lower the influence that the thigh has. If I had auto normalize turned on earlier, it would have given me a better result. I can also subtract any rogue weights off the thighs just by reducing it up there, just deleting them basically. And now that fix is done. I'm going to tidy up the view by turning off the names and the in front. And the next step is important. We want to symmetrize all those changes that I've made across to the other side. So I'm going to select them all, jump into edit mode and symmetrize. There's a few more tidy up things that we're going to do. I'm going to lock the geometry just by disabling the selectability of that collection. That's much nicer when you animate, when you're not always accidentally selecting the mesh. And then I'm also going to add that rig to the master collection as well, but that's an optional step. That's just something that I like to do. And we have ourselves a finished rig. Well done you, you have made it to the end, congratulations. So I hope you learned a bunch in this tutorial and you didn't end up pulling your hair out along the way. But remember, when we're learning stuff and it's easy, there's actually no learning that takes place. So having little hurdles that we have to overcome actually helps us improve our learning. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing your work. So please post it on the site. I want to see your versions of the Wrangler. But more importantly, I want to see you take what you've learned here and apply it to your own characters. So if you do that, please let me know on the site because I want to actually see it, and that actually excites me because I can see that you've taken the knowledge that you've learned and you've used your higher order thinking and you've created something new out of it. So please tag me in your work. I hope you've learned a bunch and I look forward to seeing your work.